So what if a single 2,000-year-old letter, one tucked away in the book of Revelation, wasn't just a message to some forgotten city? What if it was actually a prophetic diagnosis of Western history, all the way up to this very moment? All right, let's dive into this really fascinating interpretation, which sees this letter to the ancient church in Sardis as a key to understanding a cycle that just keeps repeating itself over and over again.
Right off the bat, the message to Sardis opens with one of the most chilling lines in the entire text. It says, "You have a reputation for being alive, but you are dead." I mean, wow, that is a shocking spiritual indictment. And it sets up this deep mystery. What does it even mean for something or someone to have all the outward signs of life but be completely lifeless on the inside?
And that really brings us to the core question here. How can this ancient warning possibly speak to us now, today? Well, the interpretation we're exploring hinges on one key idea. To understand the prophecy, you first have to understand the city itself.
So let's go back in time, because the key to unlocking the letter's meaning, according to this view, is hidden in the history and the geography of Sardis and in its one critical, fatal flaw.
So who was Sardis anyway? Look, this wasn't just any old town. It was the capital of the mighty Lydian Empire, a massive hub of commerce and just staggering wealth. It was so rich, in fact, that its king, Croesus, became the ancient world synonym for the phrase rich. This was a city with a golden reputation, literally.
Now, what's really fascinating here is this stark contrast between the city's reputation and its reality. You see, Sardis was built on an acropolis with sheer 1,500-foot cliffs on three sides. It looked impregnable, like a fortress built by nature itself. But that very strength, that reputation for being untouchable, it became its greatest weakness. It created this deep-seated complacency. They just stopped being watchful, figuring their geography alone would keep them safe forever.
And here is how it all unraveled. Back in 549 BC, the Persian army was laying siege to the city. As the story goes, a Persian soldier saw a Lydian defender accidentally drop his helmet over the cliff edge. He then just watched as the defender took a safe, hidden path down a fissure in the rock to go get it. Well, that night, the Persians used that exact same unguarded path to scale the cliffs and conquer the entire city while it slept. It was taken, as historians wrote, like a thief in the night. And you won't believe this, but it happened again, centuries later. They never learned their lesson. So, we have this crystal clear historical pattern, right? A great name, a reputation for strength, completely undone by an internal decay, all because they stopped watching. Now let's see how this exact pattern gets interpreted as a sweeping prophecy about a much, much later era in history.
This is where the interpretation gets really bold. The source material we're looking at claims that these 7 letters aren't just historical messages. No, they map out the entire history of the church. And in this framework, the story of Sardis, its reputation versus its reality, becomes a perfect profile for the era of the Protestant Reformation. So check out this life cycle. The Reformation kicks off with this revolutionary fire from Martin Luther, a radical return to what he saw as core biblical authority. But then, over time, that movement starts building its own institutions, its own denominations, its own traditions. And here's the classic irony, right? The revolutionary movement becomes the rigid institution it once fought against. According to this view, these denominations eventually just fossilized, having a great name, Lutheran, Calvinist, you name it, but the inner life, the fire, had drained out.
And here it is. This is the smoking gun, according to this interpretation. The letter to Sardis warns, "If therefore thou shalt not watch, I will come on thee as a thief." The source argues this is no coincidence. The exact same language used to describe the historical fall of the city is used in the letter to warn the Reformation Church of its own spiritual complacency. It's a direct parallel.
But this interpretation doesn't just stop in the past. It extends the critique of Sardis directly to the state of many institutional churches today. It's effectively putting the modern expression of the church on trial.
Does any of this sound a little familiar? The source points to several symptoms of this modern Sardis condition. It talks about a focus on ceremony instead of deep personal devotion, an adherence to form over substance, and a quiet drifting away from the very ideas that once sparked the Reformation in the first place. Having a reputation for being alive while being inwardly, well, you get the idea.
And to back this up, the source we're covering cites a researcher who claims this staggering number, 52,000, represents the number of defections from institutional churches every single week. It's described as a silent exodus. It's not a loud protest, but just a quiet stream of people slipping out the back door. Maybe because they feel that the reputation no longer matches the reality.
But here's the twist. At the exact same time people are walking away from the pews, the source points to polling that suggests a high percentage of Americans still hold the Bible in very high regard. This creates a fascinating disconnect. The argument isn't that faith is dying, but that the institutions of faith are being found wanting.
Okay, so if the institutional model is seen as having that Sardis flaw, what's the alternative? Well, the final part of this interpretation proposes a solution not by looking forward, but by looking all the way back to the very beginning.
So the proposed path forward is a return to what's called New Testament simplicity, basically the way the earliest Christians practiced their faith. It involves, first, recognizing the danger of institutional rigidity. Second, looking back to the early church model where believers met in their homes. And third, prioritizing authentic, participatory community over these formal, spectator-like services.
You can really see the contrast here. On one side, you have a model often focused on buildings, professional leadership, and set programs. On the other, a model that's focused on people, that's relational and organic. And the source makes a really interesting point here. It argues this decentralized, home-based structure is also inherently persecution-proof. Why? Because if there's no central building to seize or a single leader to arrest, the network can actually survive and even thrive under pressure.
And all of this leaves us with a challenging final thought. The story of Sardis, as it's interpreted here, is a cycle. A great name leads to complacency, and complacency leads to ruin. A revolution brings new life, but that new life eventually hardens into another institution, which then becomes complacent itself. So the question is this an unbreakable cycle? Not just for churches, but for companies, for governments, for any human endeavor? That is the timeless, 2,000-year-old warning from Sardis.